Welcome to Morning Bytes. I was told to just wait a moment before I started, so I hope that worked out well. This is a show with me, Violet Sullivan, and Jason Rebholz. Jason's not here today. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is our 30-minute monthly show to talk about all the most important cyber topics of the month. We talk about all things cyber, privacy, technology, AI, and everyone's favorite, cyber insurance. Please welcome our special guest. He's a cyber insurance veteran, a true insider. He's built products, led teams, and slayed dragons. He just made a big career move. It's Tim Francis.
Hi, everybody.
He is a staple at every major cybersecurity event for the last decade, a recent winner of the Net Diligence Community Spirit Award, and has been loving life the entire time. It's Mariana Swan.
Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
The views and opinions expressed here are solely our own and not those of our employers. Please remember. To everyone in the audience listening right now, say hi. Drop an introduction to yourself in the comments. Tell us, what do you do in cyber? Where are you listening from? Let's get the conversation started. I know Jason's not here today, but he also had a recent career move and he's got an important meeting. If you're not following Jason Rebholz, you should be following him. Let's get that out of the way. With Jason's absence, Tim, let's get started with you. What story have you been paying attention to over the last 30 days?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I've long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. One thing I was just reading, and it was interesting, there was an article in which both Microsoft and CrowdStrike are working together to try to develop a more common, consistent nomenclature around threat actors, right? As we know in this ecosystem, many of the threat actors groups goes by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 names, nicknames. And so it's easy to say, even with attribution, one carrier, one entity, one cybersecurity professional might label an attack to come from XYZ source, and another might label it from somewhere else. And really, it's the same thing. And so in our industry, right, having consistency, having a common nomenclature, I think is really important, right? It provides numerous benefits to people that need to know where these attacks are coming from, how to deal with them, and even, in my case, the insureds, right? So if we know for sure as quickly as we can that a particular attack is for sure from a certain threat actor, it's easier to go to the cybersecurity world and say, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with it quickly? But that expands into lots of other things, not just the threat actor, right? Oftentimes, one carrier, one broker, one security firm might label something as ransomware or malware, or it's XYZ software, or it's first party, when maybe we're all talking about the same thing. So if we can have a common working knowledge, and when we share information with law enforcement or government, they're getting a consistent story, and the output we might get back as carriers or brokers is consistent, and we're not either double counting or under counting what's really happening out there.
This comes up in invoicing too, because I feel like a lot of claims people I talk to have, from the vendor side, sometimes get annoyed or frustrated when people call and put things in different buckets. So I think it's not just on the threat hunting and threat mapping, but it's also on what services are being attached to rebuild and recover.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of benefit downstream for our industry. And I think there's a lot to be gained by other areas where we could have a common lexicon without coming anywhere near antitrust issues and all those other things that we do have to legitimately watch out for. But just having a common way to refer to things in our industry is going to help, virtually every area of the industry over time.
We see it from mundane things like the different acronyms that are used to describe different things, the different verbiage or expressions that get used. And so it would be helpful, but I'll tell you another area where there's another complication on that same sort of spirit is when we do get into an engagement and we retain someone like Mariana to do an investigation, and that investigation begins. I guess in an abundant effort to maintain security over that investigation, a lot of companies use these project names. They'll rename the entire investigation a different word that's not my client's name or our law firm's name or some other name, and we have to now track a new name in addition to all the other names that we've been working with the entire time. So we see that in a lot of different ways. I don't know what the rest of the world feels about that practice.
Let's just complicate cyber incidents more. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I'm kind of calling for a sort of a temporary hold on those project names until we can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, some sort of encyclopedia of sorts or what have you, to everyone go query the same thing and we can all talk about the same stuff at the same time.
It's not directly related, but whenever the whole CVE database, there was a couple days where everyone was like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all naming conventions for CVEs.
Sure.
There was a lot of commentary I heard that said kind of what's happening now, where it's private companies are going to have to step up in communication. And that's what we see with CrowdStrike and Microsoft. I feel like there was the answer. They saw there was an issue with that. Well, we're going to come at this it seems like even bigger scope on the nomenclature stuff, because they saw that these government-led programs, they may not, continue on forever.
Yeah, I mean, again, we can all sit here and folks that are listening to us that are in this ecosystem, right? We'll have some way, I think, in which a more common nomenclature makes their lives easier, makes the events easier to track, more efficient, maybe less expensive, maybe a little bit of each. But I think about over the years, just particularly trying to share information with government and vice versa, and things that sound simple. How many attacks did we see by XYZ group? It's good to have that information, but if we're all calling them something else, it gets lost in the weeds and then in the noise. And you think there's either way too many groups out there, or more groups than there actually are in real life, or ultimately kind of the playbook that they're using, it's harder to understand it right away because you think you might be seeing something from one group when really it's the same thing maybe you've seen before. And just the ability to understand how to deal with it as quickly as you can, I think, gets easier. And as we roll this stuff up and aggregate it and think about trends over time, just having some common way to refer to things across the industry is going to be helpful.
We've talked before on the show about some of the limitations in the threat intelligence in a general sense, just due to the nature of the way threat actor organizations are established. If you have one technology, if you have one malware, flavor of malware, but it's being utilized by numerous different affiliates, and each of those affiliates have a different set of sort of SOPs and personalities, then it's really limited in the value from a engagement by engagement basis on what you can use that information for. So it's helpful because it does shed some light, but this intelligence in general has limitations in a practical way from our engagements.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's helpful. Right? It doesn't. The problem doesn't somehow go away or become super easy, but it's helpful, and directionally, I think it's in the right spirit of what we're trying to accomplish.
I think that we should always have a goal to move directionally in the right way. I think that's a great word, Tim. I say that in our practice a lot as well. Mariana, what's going on in your mind? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Everyone asks why we call it Morning Bytes, and I'm just going to highlight a comment that is down there that it is morning for some people. To all my friends in the UK and other places, that this was Morning Bytes because we wanted it to be early, but we can't please everyone. All right, go to the next one. Go to the next story.
Yeah, so mine is one that is not necessarily new news from like today or yesterday. But there was an advisory put out back in 2022 by the FBI, Department of State, and Treasury about some North Korean actors, and maybe even other countries. But it appears they're trying to fund their nuclear program, and so they are hiring people, or people are hiring people here in the States, and we're actually seeing it more and more, where we're noticing like, hey, this IP doesn't look right, or HR flags something, and then they're like, we think we were breached, or something happens, and then the end result is it was another human from another country that used a fake alias or what have you, and has been in the network for quite some time as an employee doing work. So we've seen quite a few as of late, but I just think it's wild and good to kind of highlight.
We've also come across those situations, Mariana, and I thought it was a great choice of a story. That definitely plays out in real life. And I think that the more that people use human resource like placement services, and especially in the tech space, most of the interviews are done over web camera. There's always some if it's like code writing or it's some sort of technical delivery that can be outsourced to someone. And we've seen it play out in different ways. Sometimes it's simple, that it's just, in one case, there was a sort of a rogue employee that had, maximized the gig economy and essentially was working full-time jobs for like 8 different companies, and it eventually caught up with that person. But then we had the actual North Korean situation that you just said, where the client was advised by law enforcement, essentially federal law enforcement, that one of its assets, a server or a laptop or something, was sort of caught up in an investigation, and it led to the identity of this one employee. And we don't think he's got a real identity. Can you sort of look into this? And at the time that it happened, there's a lot of interesting things that go on in that. I mean, that raises a lot of issues. So there's the cyber issue, of course. You have to lock that person's account down. What do they have access to? What data was potentially at risk? And then do an investigation into whether there was unauthorized access and whether that constitutes a data breach, et cetera. But also there's an employment issue there. How did you hire this person? Are they otherwise a good employee? What's the work product been like? And what other obligations might you have when you determine that you had someone that, started working for you under false pretenses? And then, of course, the national security issue.
It also kind of underscores, Mariana, how many times we might see there be evidence of unauthorized access, and maybe there's no harm yet, or maybe we're sitting there waiting for the pin to drop. And I feel like it happens a lot more than you would expect. That there is, I guess my worst nightmare would be a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of outside actors in, laying dormant and then waiting for the right time.
Yeah. And there's even cases where the employee themselves, in some instances, they don't even know they're part of this. So some of them might be like some threat actors, et cetera. And some others, somebody just was gotten, if you will, and they just installed something in their computer or accidentally whatever. And now they're part of this scheme and they don't even know it. So the whole thing is just really wild to me. Lauren Winchester said, "What company and industry, Stu?"
Oh, no. You know better than that, Lauren. That's not.
This is a test.
I know.
But that is a tech. I'll say it was in the tech sector. I'll give a little bit. It was certainly in the tech sector. So
someone ask another question. You pull it.
Well, I'll just say, right. To expand on that, right. While this is an example, and maybe a very, when you use the word nuclear in this too, right. That's a very unique example too of why and how and what that funding might be used for. But you can kind of sort of see other events where, particularly with the so much emphasis on gaining the initial access, and whether it's back to scattered spider and some of the tactics of more and more using, U.S. domestic people in order to try to better gain access into organizations. The issue of employees either knowingly, maybe they were a good employee that went bad, maybe they're a good employee that just did something dumb. Again, we've all seen that before, but it's, we spend a lot of time and energy on systems and security and process around data, but it's still, at the end of the day, often a people person problem. And so having employee background checks and all that stuff, but it is an interesting element of trying to gain access through employees that are there for that purpose. That's not going to be a good day.
Yeah, she added to the joke. You would also like their EIN.
Size and scope. Yeah, it was a larger company, but when we spoke to the law enforcement, we had to have a meeting with the law enforcement officers and the client principals. There was like a CISO and a general counsel there, and the law enforcement sort of went into this whole investigation about how this is a trend, and sometimes it's not really about national security in the sense of like they're trying to sell state secrets. Sometimes it's like crypto mining. Sometimes it's just they're sending money back to the home country and we don't know what happens to that money when it goes back there. And they, from the public information, the people who receive the money probably don't get to keep it. So that's really a lot of the issues that the law enforcement was, and then of course they tried to get into getting almost more employment legal issues or HR issues about how do you prevent this from happening in the first place? What steps can you take to sort of be on the lookout for these fake employees? And that's really what this comes down to. And it doesn't have to be. Go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just recalling a couple of months ago there was I think a handful of us that were at an event that was in combination hosted by the FBI, and they were giving some examples of exactly this kind of thing, and it wasn't in some of the examples a person who was even physically present, right? It was, in today's day and age, it was the combination of actually using AI, which we may get to, and it was somebody who was they caught him in the process of applying, right? What would have happened had this person been employed is different, but they were applying for a position, and the process was a video chat, right? And this person said they were in a certain location and they were not even in the country, and they were using an artificial intelligence to actually fake their speech pattern just to gain employment, in the hopes that at some point they would then have employment and have access to all sorts of goods and secrets. Now, this person was caught before they were employed, but it just kind of speaks to the level of sophistication and that's behind some of these.
So to play the role of Jason Rebholz, I mean, that just goes speak to the widespread accessibility of these high technologies that heretofore have been out of reach for most people. And if you're able to use basically a website to create these fake identities and create backgrounds and speech patterns where you take the accent out of your speech now. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to improve your fakeness. And yeah, it's a brave new world for sure. It changes the dynamic.
Just all filter the accents through like Midwest accent, and then everyone would just like be so nice and so kind that it would just they give over the information. That's just
if Jason were here, I'm sure he would tell people to make sure that they at least do turn on their web camera, right? I know that he would say that, because
good call out.
At least makes it a little harder.
And speaking of, Tim, when you were speaking, I forgot to tell you that when Jason saw the story of the nomenclature with the CrowdStrike Microsoft, he said he literally like jumped out of his chair. He was so excited because it's one of those things that the tech community has been really waiting for this, and it just means a lot to everyone.
Someone had to do it. Violet, what's your story this week?
So we haven't touched on AI in a while. I want to bring that back because there's been a couple of things happening. One, the bill that has passed, the federal bill that has passed is it House or Senate? I don't remember. That federal bill has a 10-year moratorium on any AI legislation from the states. So it's like a preemption without actually calling out that it's a preemption. Well, Texas AI bill got passed last week, or this, timing flies. Texas put out a comprehensive bill that arguably is even more overarching and comprehensive than the Colorado bill. That's the other one out there. There's a lot of other ones in legislation, but this is one of those. It seems like one of those things that the Texas legislature with is trying to make their mark and say, this is what we accept and what we want as a state. And I think that a lot of the arguments against the 10-year preemption of the federal bill are that each state has different preferences of residences. Each state has different preferences of the residents. They have different needs. They have different industries. They have different sizes and scopes and harms. And I think that it was really interesting kind of dissecting and reading the Texas bill because it seemed to almost go against some of the Texas values, but it also seemed that it was narrow in scope. And a lot of people know I'm from Texas. I have like a Texan sign up there. But I think that the narrowness in scope is that one is the Texas AI bill is really focused on the government, restricting the government from using it for unlawful purposes. It doesn't do much with private companies. I think that there's, very specific exclusions like biometric use of AI. And I think that there are great opportunities, like they have an AI sandbox opportunity for innovation. So saying we're not stifling innovation, we're not cutting everything out, we're going to give a sandbox for the government usage of this AI. It's not necessarily helping on the private sector, which I think is where we really do need the guardrails put closely around AI and the use of AI.
And I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with the Texas law about it. Is it with the areas that you said that you were surprised by? Are those more about like the ethics in the development of products, or in the application, or what was it that you think is more onerous?
I think that there was a specific section that calls out and outright bans political viewpoint discrimination. So it actually restricts free speech, which that surprised me, because usually Texas and Florida are out there saying we want to be able to say whatever we want to say. And it also, that ban of political viewpoint discrimination, first of all, kind of politicizes AI for no reason. I thought that was very strange to call that out, but also it may also run afoul with Section 230, that, that liability issue, that content cannot or should not be held against the ones holding the content, so that there can be innovation and movement. And, we saw that with the internet, and now they're trying to figure out how to do it with the AI. So there's an outright bans here saying you are not able to have or filter viewpoint discrimination based on the data that you have. It's
in the development of the learning model, essentially.
Yeah, correct. Didn't
that come out of like some of those crazy examples that people were throwing around in when one of the Google versions came out, and they would say, like, can you paint the picture of George Washington, and the picture they would paint would be African American, and people would say, well, that's not a very accurate portrayal of George Washington. And I think that some of those rules came out in the wake of that, or maybe I misremembered.
Well, I would actually heard the opposite. Is that I heard lots of the issues of AI were that you would ask for, I want a picture of a princess, and it would only show, white females with blonde hair or something. So I think actually saying don't show a viewpoint. I don't know. I get mixed up on all of this.
The data ethics is real. When clients come to us to talk about AI in the tech sector, that is what you just said is they're very concerned about,
right.
And more from not really political, just from practical, because if you develop a learning language, and we watched it demonstrated a million times. If you, and I may have even used this example before on this show, if you type into the prompt, how does one obtain a marriage license? You're going to get a very different response than if you write in, how do you, with the letter U, get married? And because they understand, the learning model knows, based on the phraseology that you ask the question, the type of sophistication you're going to expect the answer to be. And that is by nature prejudicial, right? So they're trying to develop ways, they're trying to find ways that in the development to take in a non-discriminatory, non-prejudicial way to answer those types of questions.
That brings up another point, is the enforcement of the Texas AI bill is attorney general only. There's no private cause of action. There's no private right of action. It's civil fines and penalties, all by the Texas AG. And if we go back in history, they've been super involved in privacy and going after big tech. So I guess one good side is it would have a lot of big teeth to go after and react to tech. It would have a lot of impact from the attorney general side. It just wouldn't have the private cause of action that would allow the individual harms to get addressed.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know enough about that legislation, but just the idea of thinking about, a 10-year moratorium and thinking about what AI does now, right? And just Stu, what you're talking about, some of the pitfalls right now of AI. 10 years from now, 10 months from now, I couldn't tell you what the landscape would look like. It'll be different, right? It'll be different 10 months from now, 10 years from now. There, that who knows really what the landscape is going to look like. I certainly don't.
I've promised you that I
Oh,
won't
it's
be
going to be
political.
completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet you 10 years ago, we weren't thinking all this stuff is going to be going on. And here we are,
Well,
10
and
years
I
from
think
now.
the 10-year moratorium from a federal, it scared me a lot more 2 weeks ago than it did as of yesterday. And again, trying not to be political at all. The big, beautiful bill getting from one stage to the next, it has a lot of other issues besides just the AI 10-year ban. But that's a really good one to jump in on and argue with, because it doesn't relate to, it's not relating specifically to the budget. There's a lot of exceptions and things that people are arguing against.
If I could, since Marianne, you said this 10 years ago, I think we were sitting around, and if there wasn't podcasts, but if there was, we would have been talking about, Blackberries and employees starting to use something called the cloud. And I mean, literally that was not that, the dark ages, but that's where the conversation probably was back then. And where it'll be 10 years from now, I don't know.
I remember when it was just a myth that you could talk into your phone, and now it's like we're all doing it, and we're not Inspector Gadget, like. Sorry, Stu.
No. It's a good segue to my story with a few minutes left in our program, also related to AI, which was, and I saying that this is not a Terminator, situation, but it was in a simulation. So it was in the OpenAI development laboratory. They were playing with new models, and they were simulating what would happen under certain conditions if you told the AI to shut down, to end its session. And in this one simulation, and it was sort of openly reported because it was so sensational. If you read the headline, it kind of looked like, oh my God, Sarah Connor was right. But there were numerous instances where the AI either outright refused to shut itself down, or it actually took steps to prevent anyone else from being able to shut it down. And that, again, this was in a laboratory, this was controlled, this was development, but it certainly, the journalists got a little excited, and there were a lot of crazy headlines that came out when this happened. I was actually surprised it didn't get even more news, and that's actually what made me think to read the details of the story, because it was not as alarmist as the headline suggested. But it is, to your point you mentioned earlier, Tim, where are we going to be 10 years from now? In the development of AI, are we dealing with a Sarah Connor situation here, where the machines are going to start sort of demanding their own rights?
To be fair, the 10-year moratorium wasn't on all AI rules and legislation. It was just on states trying to prohibit the patchwork approach.
Right.
So, but that would be assuming that federal government could put out rules in a fast enough manner to keep up with tech, which we know doesn't work either.
Right.
So I would leave it with that. We can do our speed round to close out. Any predictions coming up? That's always a good one. Violet, want to start?
Okay, I'm going to predict something I predicted 6 months ago and still hasn't come true. CMMC is going to still be a big deal, which is dealing with the U.S. federal government contracts and having a lot more stringent requirements.
That's a big deal. I think it's a big deal.
Well, I mean, it is a big deal, but remember, someone hadn't heard of it last time we brought it up. So I'm just going to keep going with that one.
I like it. Tim, what about you? What is a good prediction?
My prediction is no prediction, right? I mean, I think we'll when next time we're on the podcast, and I'll have something more jazzy on my wall. I can't keep up with the backgrounds that you guys have, right? We'll still be talking about the next thing, right? Whether that's the next AI, there'll be the next thing. I don't know what exactly it's going to be, but there's always going to be something in this space that's keeping us on our toes and looking around the next corner and the corner after that.
Hear, hear. Mariana, what are you predicting?
Predictions. Who's going to be king and queen of IW or Cyberprom?
Wow.
No, I'm kidding. This is super wild. When I was in college, I thought about writing a paper on this, but predictions in 10 years, maybe 20, we'll all have like chips put in our brains that think of us, identify us, does all the like thinking. I don't know. I just, with
The
everything.
Neuralink. It's here.
Neuralink, it's already here.
It's here. The Neuralink.
But well, I know, but we don't, do you have one?
No.
I don't have
That's
one.
a great question.
I don't know.
I'm gonna wait for Gen 2 on that one.
Yeah, this is just a regular
Oh,
old
you
headset,
beta tester.
unfortunately.
No. I really like the running BlackBerry joke, though. We're going to keep that, Tim, and
Yeah, I know.
in your session. We're
Hi.
just going to keep going with that. Because
Stu, what about you?
BlackBerry too. All right, we're going to
my
close out
prediction
now,
is
but thank
that-
you. For,
One more prediction. Next month is going to be an unbelievable show. So everyone's got to tune in. We got some great special guests coming up on our July episode. I think we're playing with the dates a little bit because of the Independence Day holiday. So we'll get back to you on that. But soon, please do tune in. We missed Jason. Please follow him. Follow Violet. Follow Tim. Follow
can I say who
Mariana.
the guests are going to be?
Go ahead.
We have John Spays from Converge and Johnny from ICC.
All right. It's going to be a good one. We're going to go deep. Have a great week, everybody.
Okay, take care.